He fired her at noon. She owned the company by night. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The rhythmic clatter of keyboards and the low hum of fluorescent lights formed the mundane soundtrack to Anna Sharma's days at Innovatech Solutions. Tucked away in a corner cubicle of the sprawling open-plan office, Anna was an almost invisible cog in the marketing department, a junior data analyst whose primary task involved sifting through endless spreadsheets, her reports often overlooked or absorbed into larger presentations compiled by more senior, more vocal colleagues. At 34, she dressed in practical, unassuming clothes, simple blouses, dark trousers, comfortable flat shoes, a stark contrast to the power suits and designer labels favored by many of Innovatech's ambitious climbers. Her dark hair was usually tied back in a neat, functional ponytail, and her quiet demeanor meant she rarely drew attention, preferring to observe from the periphery. Few, if any, of her colleagues knew that the modest apartment she returned to each evening was paid for not by her meager Innovatech salary, but by the dividends of a diversified global investment portfolio she had meticulously built over a decade. A portfolio managed with a shrewdness and foresight that would have astounded the very executives who barely registered her presence. Fewer still knew that her late grandfather, a self-made industrialist from far-off land, had instilled in her not just a formidable understanding of market dynamics, but also a deep-seated belief in ethical business and the quiet power of strategic patience. Anna was at Innovatech not out of necessity, but by design. After a period of intense, high-stakes financial advisory work in global markets following her grandfather's passing, a world she had excelled in but found ultimately hollow, she had sought a different perspective. She wanted to understand a company from the ground up, to see firsthand the interplay of strategy, culture, and everyday operations before deciding on her next significant investment. Innovatech, with its veneer of innovation and its underlying currents of inefficiency and questionable leadership, had presented itself as a fascinating, if occasionally frustrating, case study. Her direct manager, Mr. Julian Thorne, was the senior vice president of marketing, a man whose ambition far outstripped his actual competence. Thorne was a peacock in a pinstripe suit, his voice perpetually pitched at a volume that demanded attention, his opinions delivered as immutable facts. He thrived on public displays of authority, often at the expense of his subordinates. He had a particular disdain for those he perceived as weak or lacking in executive presence, a category into which Anna, with her quiet ways and lack of overt self-promotion, had unfortunately fallen in his estimation. He rarely addressed her directly, preferring to communicate through her team lead, and when he did, his tone was invariably condescending. Today, like many other days, Anna was meticulously cross-referencing customer engagement data for a new product line, a product line she privately believed was deeply flawed due to a rushed development cycle and a fundamental misunderstanding of the target market. Her preliminary analysis suggested a worrying trend of early adopter dissatisfaction, something that seemed to be entirely missed in the glowing internal reports circulated by Thorne's favorite acolytes. She made a quiet note in her personal log, a habit from her financial days. Innovatech pulls SmartBand, significant negative sentiment indicators in user forums, correlating with higher-than-expected return rates. Official internal metrics appear to be selectively curated. Potential Q3 write-down if unaddressed. She wondered, not for the first time, if anyone higher up actually read the raw data, or if they, too, preferred the polished narratives. Have you ever found yourself in a situation, perhaps in a corporate tower in Frankfurt, a bustling startup in Silicon Valley, or even a community project in your own neighborhood, where your quiet contributions were overlooked, your insights dismissed, simply because you didn't shout the loudest or wear the most expensive suit, where the perception of competence was valued more than actual competence itself? Anna understood this dynamic all too well. She had seen it play out on grand stages and in quiet backrooms. But she also knew that perception, unlike fact, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the irrefutable weight of reality. In reality, for Innovatech Solutions and Mr. Julian Thorne was about to become very, very real. She continued her work, her fingers flying silently across her keyboard, a quiet observer patiently gathering the threads of a much larger, more complex tapestry than anyone around her could possibly imagine. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a routine departmental meeting. Mr. Thorne had called the entire marketing team into the glass-walled conference room, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming quarterly review. In reality, it was another opportunity for him to pontificate, to bask in the nervous deference of his underlings, and to assert his dominance. He was particularly agitated today. Rumors were circulating about a potential dip in the company's stock price, and Thorne, whose compensation was heavily tied to such metrics, was clearly feeling the pressure. He paced before the large projection screen, which displayed a series of overly optimistic charts he had undoubtedly forced some junior staffer to create. Innovatech is on an upward trajectory, he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. Our new Pulse smartband is a game changer. The market is responding with unprecedented enthusiasm. He conveniently ignored the worried murmurs from the product development team about escalating return rates and scathing online reviews. His gaze then swept across the room, landing, as if by malevolent design, on Anna. Now, to ensure our projections are robust, he continued, a predatory glint in his eye, we need accurate real-time data. Sharma. He snapped his fingers in her direction, a gesture of supreme condescension. You've been tracking the initial sales velocity and online engagement for Pulse, correct? Give us the executive summary. And make it snappy. We don't have all day for granular details. Anna, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. She hadn't expected to be called upon directly, especially not for an executive summary of complex data she had been explicitly told to keep raw and uninterpreted for her team lead. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice calm and even. The initial data shows a mixed response. While early sales met projections, the post-purchase engagement metrics are concerning. There's a statistically significant correlation between negative user feedback on Forum X and Y and product return requests logged within the first 30 days. Thorne's face began to darken. This was not the narrative he wanted. Concerning? Sharma, are you suggesting our flagship product is failing? His voice dripped with sarcasm. I am suggesting, Mr. Thorne, Anna replied, choosing her words carefully, that the raw data indicates potential issues with user satisfaction and product retention that warrant further investigation before we finalize the quarterly revenue forecast based solely on initial sales figures. Around the table, a few of Thorne's more sycophantic team members began to shift uncomfortably. They knew Thorne hated bad news, especially in a public forum. Potential issues? Thorne scoffed, his voice rising. Are you a data analyst, Sharma, or a fortune teller specializing in doom and gloom? I asked for an executive summary, not a dissertation on potential problems. Give me the numbers that matter, the positive numbers, the ones that prove my strategy is working. Anna met his gaze steadily. The most statistically reliable numbers, Mr. Thorne, also include a 32% return rate within the first month for batch alpha of the Pulse Band and a 78% drop-off in active user engagement on the companion app after the first week. These figures are significantly outside the acceptable parameters for a new product launch in this category. The silence in the conference room was now absolute, broken only by Thorne's increasingly heavy breathing. He looked as if Anna had physically struck him. He had expected compliance, perhaps a timid, heavily filtered version of the data. He had not expected unvarnished, quantifiable failure, delivered with such quiet, irrefutable precision. His face contorted in a mask of fury. Incompetence, he finally roared, slamming his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. This is what I get for trusting so-called analysts who can't see the bigger picture. You are deliberately trying to sabotage this product launch, Sharma, to undermine my leadership. He strode towards her, his face inches from hers. You clearly have no understanding of marketing strategy, no grasp of corporate vision. You are a number cruncher, a drone, incapable of strategic thought. He turned to the rest of the stunned team. This is an example of what we will not tolerate at Innovatech. Negativity, lack of vision, failure to support the team's objectives. He then whirled back to Anna. Sharma, you're a disruptive influence. Your analysis is flawed. Your attitude is defeatist. And frankly, your continued presence in this department is detrimental to morale and progress. As of this moment, your employment with Innovatech Solutions is terminated. Pack your personal belongings. Security will escort you from the premises. He delivered the final words with a sneer of triumph, clearly expecting her to crumble, to plead, to cry. Instead, Anna simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. She picked up her notepad, tucked her pen neatly into its spiral, and stood. The entire room watched, breathless, as the quiet data analyst, publicly shamed and summarily fired, walked slowly and deliberately towards the door, her sensible shoes making almost no sound on the polished floor. Julian Thorne had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He had underestimated Anna Sharma, and he had done so in front of everyone. The walk from the conference room back to her cubicle felt like traversing a minefield under a global spotlight. Every eye in the open-plan office seemed to be fixed on Anna, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled relief that it wasn't them in the line of fire. Whispers followed her like a rustling wind. "Did you hear?" Thorne finally snapped. She had it coming, always so negative. Anna ignored them all. She moved with a strange sense of calm, an almost detached serenity. The public humiliation, Thorne's performative rage, it had all felt predictable. Almost like a scene she had observed many times before, in different settings with different actors, but with the same underlying dynamics of power misused and truth suppressed. As she reached her small cubicle, she found her team lead, Sarah, hovering awkwardly, her face pale. "Anna, I'm so sorry," Sarah stammered, wringing her hands. "I tried to tell him your data was solid, that you were just being thorough, but he wouldn't listen." Anna offered a small, reassuring smile. "It's all right, Sarah. It's not your fault. Mr. Thorne prefers a different kind of reality." She began to pack her few personal items into a small cardboard box she found under her desk. A framed photo of her late grandfather, a chipped ceramic mug, a well-thumbed book of poetry, and the small, intricately carved wooden bird her grandfather had given her, which she always kept in her drawer. She picked up the bird, its smooth, familiar contours a comfort in her palm. It was a kestrel, a bird known for its keen eyesight, its ability to hover patiently, observing, before striking with incredible precision. A fitting emblem, she thought. As she was placing the last of her items in the box, one of Thorne's favored lieutenants, a smarmy young man named Mark, swaggered over, a smirk playing on his lips. "Heard you got the boot, Sharma," Mark said, leaning against her cubicle wall. "Tough break. Guess some people just aren't cut out for the fast lane at Innovatech. Maybe try a nice, quiet library next time? More your speed, I reckon." Anna didn't even look at him. She simply closed the flaps of her box. "Perhaps," she said, her voice even. "Or perhaps the fast lane here is heading toward a rather abrupt dead end." Mark's smirk faltered slightly at her unexpected composure, her lack of distress. He had come to gloat, to witness her defeat. He found, instead, an unnerving stillness. Security arrived, 2 uniformed guards looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Miss Sharma, we've been instructed to escort you from the building." "Of course," Anna said, picking up her box. She walked out of Innovatech Solutions with her head held high, not with defiance, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent, the guards flanking her like somber sentinels. As she stepped out into the bustling city street, the late afternoon sun felt surprisingly warm on her face. She took a deep breath of the city air, a mixture of exhaust fumes and freedom. She did not feel defeated. She did not feel shame. Instead, a cold, clear purpose was solidifying within her. Julian Thorne had publicly fired her for presenting inconvenient truths. He had tried to humiliate her, to silence her. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her diligence for drudgery. He had no idea of the resources she commanded, the networks she could access, the strategic mind that lay hidden behind her unassuming exterior. As she hailed a cab, she pulled out her personal, encrypted smartphone, a device far more sophisticated than anything issued by Innovatech. She made a single call. "It's done," she said into the phone, her voice now devoid of any accent, crisp and authoritative. "The internal assessment is complete. Proceed with Phase 1. Aggressive acquisition. Target 51%. And arrange a full forensic audit of Innovatech's financials, particularly the marketing division's slush fund and the R&D expenditure for the Pulse project. I want everything. By tomorrow morning." She listened for a moment. Then a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Excellent. And Michael?" "Inform the board of Titan Consolidated Holdings that their wayward subsidiary, Innovatech, is about to receive some much-needed adult supervision." She ended the call. The kestrel in her pocket felt warm. The game, she thought, was finally afoot. Thorne wanted a reality of his own making. Anna Sharma was about to give him one he would never forget. The news of Anna Sharma's unceremonious firing spread through Innovatech like a contagion, breeding a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. Mr. Thorne, riding high on his perceived victory, made sure everyone understood the message. Dissent would not be tolerated, and his authority was absolute. He called an impromptu departmental meeting immediately after Anna's departure, not to discuss strategy, but to reinforce his dominance. "Let Sharma's dismissal be a lesson to all of you," he declaimed, pacing before his now thoroughly cowed team. "Innovatech rewards loyalty, positivity, and a can-do attitude. We are on the cusp of greatness with the Pulse Smart Band, and I will not allow naysayers or data-twisting pessimists to derail our success." He conveniently failed to mention the 32% return rate or the plummeting user engagement that Anna had so calmly presented. Instead, he projected a new set of cherry-picked metrics, a dazzling array of vanity numbers that painted a picture of unmitigated triumph. His sycophants, led by Mark, nodded vigorously, praising Thorne's decisive leadership and visionary insight. Sarah, Anna's former team lead, sat in stony silence. Her earlier sympathy for Anna now mixed with a growing unease about the company's direction and Thorne's increasingly tyrannical behavior. She knew Anna's data had been accurate, her concerns valid. She also knew that speaking up would likely mean sharing Anna's fate. The culture of fear at Innovatech, already pervasive, intensified. Employees whispered in hushed tones by the water cooler, their conversations ceasing abruptly if a manager approached. Productivity, ironically, dipped as people became more focused on appearing busy and agreeable than on actual, substantive work. Innovation, the very lifeblood of a tech company, withered on the vine, choked by the fear of presenting any idea that might deviate from Thorne's pre-approved narrative. Thorne, meanwhile, reveled in his reinforced power. He strutted through the office like a conquering hero, his pronouncements becoming even more grandiose, his demands more unreasonable. He saw Anna's dismissal not just as the removal of an irritant, but as a validation of his entire management philosophy. He was blind to the rot spreading beneath the polished surface of Innovatech, oblivious to the fact that the company was bleeding talent, hemorrhaging cash on ill-conceived projects, and rapidly losing credibility in the marketplace. He was, in essence, piloting a ship directly towards an iceberg, all while congratulating himself on the speed and elegance of its passage. He even made a point of having Anna's former cubicle cleared out with ostentatious haste, her nameplate removed as if to erase any trace of her existence. He told Mark to use the space for overflowing optimism, a typically vacuous Thornism that nonetheless underscored his contempt. Little did he know that while he was busy rearranging the deck chairs on his sinking Titanic, Anna Sharma was orchestrating a maneuver of such audacious scale and breathtaking speed that it would rewrite the very ownership of the vessel. From a discreet, unbranded office suite in a different part of the city, the operational hub of her family's vast but quietly managed holding company, Titan Consolidated, Anna was directing a team of financial analysts, legal experts, and market strategists. The instruction had been clear: acquire a controlling interest in Innovatech Solutions, and do it quickly, quietly, and decisively. Her team, seasoned professionals who had executed complex international deals under her grandfather's tutelage and then her own, moved with practiced efficiency. They leveraged existing nominee accounts, utilized a network of allied investment firms, and exploited subtle market fluctuations to begin accumulating Innovatech stock without triggering undue alarm. It was a high-stakes game of corporate chess, played in the shadowy world of block trades and dark pools, a world Julian Thorne, with a superficial understanding of market dynamics, couldn't even begin to comprehend. Anna herself remained calm, focused, a general directing her forces from a secure command center. The emotional sting of her public firing had already faded, replaced by a cold, analytical resolve. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about rectifying a wrong, not just her own dismissal, but the systemic mismanagement that was slowly killing a company with genuine, albeit neglected, potential. It was about honoring her grandfather's legacy of building sustainable, ethical businesses. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was about demonstrating, in the most irrefutable way possible, that true power lay not in bluster and bullying, but in foresight, strategy, and the courage to act decisively when the moment was right. The groundwork was being laid, the pieces moved into position. Julian Thorne, basking in the illusion of his own brilliance, had no idea that the quiet data analyst he had so contemptuously discarded was about to become his worst nightmare, and Innovatech's unlikely savior. The first tremors of the impending earthquake hit Innovatech Solutions on Thursday morning, less than 48 hours after Anna's dismissal. A series of unusually large block trades of Innovatech stock were reported on the financial news wires, attributed to undisclosed institutional investors. The company's share price, which had been stagnating, saw a sudden, inexplicable surge. Julian Thorne, when asked about it by a nervous junior executive, dismissed it airily. "Standard market fluctuations, Johnson," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Probably just some profit-taking by the short sellers who foolishly bet against our Pulse smartband. They see the writing on the wall. Innovatech is a rocket ship, and they're just clearing the launch pad." His bluster, however, failed to quell a growing unease among the company's more astute observers. The volume of trading was too high, the buying too aggressive, to be mere fluctuations. Rumors began to circulate: a hostile takeover bid, a merger with a larger competitor, a leveraged buyout by a private equity firm. The company's actual board of directors, a group of mostly semi-retired grandees who had long been content to let Finch, or rather Thorne, who was the de facto operational head in many respects, especially after Finch's quiet sidelining due to health reasons some months prior, a euphemism for the board losing patience with his excesses, run the show as long as the dividend checks kept coming, were suddenly jolted into alertness. Frantic calls were made to Innovatech's investor relations department, which, under Thorne's streamlined management, consisted of one overworked intern and a broken fax machine. The intern, predictably, knew nothing. By midday, the financial press was buzzing. "Mysterious buyer snaps up significant stake in Innovatech Solutions," blared one headline. "Innovatech takeover speculation mounts as trading volume soars," screamed another. Thorne, cornered by a gaggle of anxious department heads, tried to project an image of calm control, but his usual bombast was noticeably strained. "This is nothing more than opportunistic speculation," he insisted, his voice a little too loud, his smile a little too forced. "Innovatech has strong fundamentals, a visionary product pipeline, and a robust defense against any unwelcome advances. I am in complete control of this situation." In reality, he was scrambling, making panic calls to the company's ancient legal counsel, a man more versed in patent law from the 1980s than in modern corporate rating tactics. He had no idea who was buying, why they were buying, or what their intentions were. He was a general facing a ghost army, his conventional weapons useless. Meanwhile, in her discreet command center, Anna Sharma calmly reviewed the latest transaction reports. Her team had been ruthlessly efficient. They had secured just over 47% of Innovatech's outstanding shares through a series of carefully orchestrated purchases, executed across multiple exchanges and through various intermediaries to avoid triggering mandatory disclosure thresholds prematurely. The final critical block of shares needed to secure a controlling interest, a 5% stake held by a disgruntled early investor who had long since lost faith in Innovatech's leadership, was scheduled to be acquired via a pre-negotiated private sale that very evening. Anna allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. Phase 1 was nearing completion. Phase 2, the formal notification to the Innovatech board and the Securities and Exchange Commission, was queued for 8 a.m. the following morning. The timing was critical. She wanted the news to hit just as the board was gathering for its hastily convened emergency meeting, a meeting Thorne had undoubtedly called to try and shore up his rapidly crumbling defenses. She thought of Thorne, of his arrogance, his casual cruelty, his willful blindness. He had sought to erase her, to make her insignificant. He would soon discover that in the world of high-stakes corporate maneuvering, the most dangerous players are often the ones you never see coming, the ones who operate in the quiet spaces, meticulously planning their moves, waiting for the precise moment to say, checkmate. The evening before the denouement, Anna did something she hadn't done in years. She took out the small, worn wooden kestrel her grandfather had carved for her. She ran her thumb over its smooth, polished surface. Patience, Mija, he had always told her. Observe, understand, and when the time is right, act with unwavering precision. Let your actions speak louder than any boast. Tomorrow, her actions would speak volumes. The emergency board meeting at Innovatech Solutions was scheduled for 9 a.m. Friday. The atmosphere in the corporate headquarters was electric, a potent cocktail of fear, speculation, and barely concealed panic. Julian Thorne had arrived looking harried, his usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. He had spent a sleepless night trying, and failing, to identify the mysterious entity that was systematically devouring his company's stock. His attempts to project an air of confident leadership were met with skeptical glances from the board members, who had flown in from various parts of the country, their expressions grim. The boardroom, the same one where Anna had been so contemptuously dismissed just 3 days prior, felt like a pressure cooker. Thorne began the meeting with a rambling, defensive speech, blaming unscrupulous market manipulators and disloyal short sellers for the company's current predicament. He insisted that Innovatech's fundamentals were sound, that the Pulse Smart Band was a triumph of innovation, and that he had a multi-pronged strategy to repel any hostile takeover attempt. His words, however, lacked conviction, and the board members listened with stony impatience. At precisely 9:15 a.m., just as Thorne was launching into a particularly unconvincing projection of future profits, his executive assistant, a flustered young woman named Chloe, hurried into the room and whispered urgently in his ear. Thorne's face went from pale to ashen. He swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the mahogany table for support. What is it, Chloe?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. Chloe, looking terrified, handed him a single sheet of paper, a formal notification, delivered by courier and simultaneously filed with the SEC. "Mr. Thorne, sir," she stammered. It's a Schedule 13D filing. A new entity, Titan Consolidated Holdings, has just declared beneficial ownership of 51.2% of Innovatech Solutions." The room erupted in stunned murmurs. 51.2%. A controlling interest. The hostile takeover wasn't a threat. It was a reality. Thorne stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "Titan Consolidated Holdings?" he croaked. Who in God's name is Titan Consolidated Holdings? I've never heard of them." One of the older board members, a seasoned financier named Alistair Blackwood, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until now, cleared his throat. "Actually, Julian," Blackwood said, his voice dry, "I believe some of us are familiar with Titan Consolidated." a rather discreet but exceptionally powerful global investment firm, known for its decisive interventions in underperforming assets. They don't typically announce their moves until the game is already won. Thorne looked wildly around the room, his eyes pleading. But who is behind it? Who is their principal? We need to negotiate. We need to. Just then, the main boardroom doors opened silently. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a sharply tailored dark gray suit that radiated quiet authority, her expression calm and unreadable, was Anna Sharma. She held a simple leather portfolio in one hand. Beside her stood two individuals, a man and a woman, both equally composed, both exuding an air of formidable competence, whom no one in the room recognized. Julian Thorne stared, his jaw agape, his eyes bulging. It was as if he were seeing a ghost, a particularly vengeful and impeccably dressed ghost. "You," he finally managed to choke out, pointing a trembling finger at Anna. What are you doing here?" "Security. Get her out of here. She was fired. She's trespassing." Anna advanced slowly into the room, her sensible heels making a soft, deliberate clicking sound on the polished floor. She stopped at the foot of the massive boardroom table, directly opposite Thorne. Her team flanked her, silent and watchful. "Actually, Mr. Thorne," Anna said, her voice clear and steady, her accent, if anything, lending a certain exotic gravitas to her words, "I believe I have every right to be here." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the stunned faces of the board members, before finally resting, with cool precision, on Thorne. "You see, Julian," she continued, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, "Titan Consolidated Holdings, the new majority shareholder of Innovatech Solutions? That would be me. Or rather, the family office I direct." The silence in the room was so profound it was almost deafening. Julian Thorne looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The quiet, unassuming data analyst he had publicly shamed and fired, the woman he had dismissed as incompetent and insignificant, had just announced, with unnerving calm, that she now owned his company. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey, it turned out, had been a predator in disguise all along. The shockwave from Anna's announcement rolled through Boardroom C, leaving a wake of stunned disbelief and dawning horror, particularly on the face of Julian Thorne. He swayed, his knuckles white as he gripped the table, his carefully constructed world imploding before his very eyes. No, it's not possible," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. This is a joke. A trick. You can't." "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Thorne, it is very possible, and it is most certainly not a joke," Anna replied, her voice maintaining its calm, almost surgical precision. She opened her portfolio and produced a set of impeccably organized documents, placing them gently on the table. "Here are the relevant SEC filings, the executed share purchase agreements, and the official notification of change of control, all duly notarized and effective as of 8 a.m. this morning. My legal counsel." She gestured to the composed woman beside her, Ms. Evelyn Hayes, a renowned corporate litigator, "can walk you through the finer points if you wish, though I suspect the implications are quite clear." Thorne stared at the documents as if they were live scorpions. He looked wildly around the room, seeking some sign of support, some ally who would denounce this absurdity. But the faces of the board members were a mixture of shock, rapid calculation, and in the case of Alistair Blackwood, a kind of grim, almost amused satisfaction. They were seasoned players in the corporate game. They knew a legitimate power play when they saw one, however unorthodox its execution. But why? Thorne finally choked out, his arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only raw, bewildered despair. "Why Innovatech?" Anna regarded him coolly. "Several reasons, Mr. Thorne. Firstly, Innovatech, despite its current mismanagement, possesses certain core assets and intellectual properties that, if properly leveraged, hold significant potential. My grandfather taught me to see value where others see only decline." Her gaze hardened slightly. "Secondly, I have a profound dislike for inefficiency, for wasted potential, and for corporate cultures that stifle talent and reward mediocrity. Innovatech, under your leadership, has unfortunately become a case study in all three. She paused, letting her words sink in. And thirdly, Julian, she said, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, though it carried clearly across the silent room. Let's just say I have a particular aversion to bullies, and I believe in decisive course correction when one encounters them. The implication was unmistakable. This wasn't just business. It was on some level personal. Not a petty revenge, but a profound, systemic rectification. Ms. Hayes stepped forward. As the representative of the new majority shareholder, she announced, her voice crisp and professional, Ms. Sharma is now exercising her right to reconstitute the board and assume direct operational control of Innovatech Solutions. Her first act as controlling shareholder will be to nominate herself as interim chief executive officer, effective immediately. We will, of course, follow all appropriate corporate governance procedures, but given our controlling interest, the outcome is predetermined. Thorne looked as if he might actually weep.